Maybe not.
To be determined. Okay, so you're on, and there are a couple people. Hopefully nobody sends in a chat, because that might be...
Oh, okay. So I am on now. Okay.
Yeah.
Bismillah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا فمن يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله ثم أما بعد. ما شاء Allah, you can't tell, but it is a great honor. I say this every class, that it's a great honor and a great privilege, but I really mean it's a great honor and a great privilege to actually be in person at DIC. We have a couple people in the space, and the rest of you, all two of you, are tuning in online, inshallah. We hope to rebuild some of our momentum so that we can resume class here at DIC. I have a good idea about what book we could cover together, but I wanted to put it before the entire group to see, how you guys felt about my suggestion. But before doing that, does anybody have a question or anything they'd like to discuss? Or okay, alhamdulillah. So yeah, I was actually thinking, are you familiar, is anyone familiar with the book Shama'il Muhammadiyah by Imam al-Tirmidhi? Right, so it's a book about the personal affects and the character and the person of the Prophet ﷺ and his description. And I was thinking that we could cover it authoritatively in Arabic and in English so that everyone who finishes the class will have a ijaza. They'll have a certificate, a license of having covered the book authoritatively from start to finish with someone who covered the book. It is an older book, and whenever you're reading books that were authored in the past, you're venturing into the past. The context is very different. Cultural sensibilities were different. The debates were different. I mean, you're entering in a complete different context. And I find that this will either be something we find explorative, like, wow, life must have been different, back then, or this can unfortunately be something we find offensive. So there are mentions of human enslavement, maybe some of the context around fighting or wars could be different than what, people are accustomed to. Maybe there's a few hadith in there that maybe the topic of spousal relations or gender relations could offer something that is a little different than what we're accustomed to and things like that. But to my mind, one of the most interesting things about being a Muslim is that you do have this relationship with the past, which doesn't entail kind of taking the past and importing it without analysis into the present and just, almost romantically trying to recreate the past in the present. But I don't think the past is something we should be afraid of, because all of us, inshallah, will be a part of the past at some point or another. And you might have people talking about things that were norms and societal and social conventions for us that could strike other people 200 years from now as enormities. Like, they used to do what? People actually owned pets. How could they? Those despicable people. And if we were there to defend ourselves, we would probably say it was just a cat, man. It's just a common thing in 2021 to own a cat. We didn't really think about it in the same way, of course, that maybe people 200 years from now might think about owning pets or something like that. So, because that kind of historical deep dive doesn't scare me. It's not like, oh my God, they practice human bondage. Well, they did. That was a part of their society. But I find that some people, they're so disturbed by those aspects of the past that are different in feeling, in texture, in norms, etc., that they get distracted from, the real purpose of the book, which is to connect with the Prophet ﷺ and to learn more about him, learn more about his character, learn more about his physical description, learn more about how he was. I think it would be a good book to cover. I think it would be something good to come back with, as a group. I have a very good copy of the book. I think it's something that would leave us, a lot of room for discussion, exchange. I don't feel like it would descend into this very unilateral, me just talking. I think it would be very interesting, but I don't know how you guys feel about it or how maybe people tuning in online feel about it. But I think it would be a great piece to cover. What do you guys think?
Really cool. I think there was like a new series or another one from kind of like.
Yes.
I thought that was really good.
Muhammad Sulaiman is, mashallah, a great gift to the American Muslim community. He does a very good job. And, he's someone that if he is being featured and there's a microphone in front of him, I'm never worried about what he's going to say. I'm never like, don't do it. There's some Muslim speakers, as soon as they say, so what do you think about this? You're like, no. And sure enough, they say something. And he's principled, but without being polarizing. He's principled, but he's not polarizing, which is a very unique balance. Usually, people that we esteem for them for their principled stances are quite polarizing. You either love them or you hate them. Imam Ahmad is, mashallah. So I think if we came and we did something that was even remotely similar to what he was doing in Ramadan, that would place us in very good company. But I don't know, what do you think? Do you have any ideas about what we should cover next?
No, I like that because I Celebrate Mercy did in New York.
I've actually taught this book with Celebrate Mercy, portions of it, probably more than 10 times. It was huge. It was the whole weekend, and they want to do all 485 hadith in the weekend, and all of them in Arabic, all of them in English, with explanations. Tariq al-Masidi, who is the executive director of Celebrate Mercy, I always wondered about his background, and he said, I used to do supply chain management for Procter and Gamble before I decided to launch, Celebrate Mercy. I said, I get it now. Now I understand. now I understand, why he's such a stickler for efficiency. And I love Tariq. He's, a gem of a human being. But man, I tell you, boy, if there's someone that's gonna push you, we're by 15 seconds, and we have 3 more. If you can go and just kind of touch upon each of them for about 37 seconds apiece, that would be great. It's like 37 seconds. 37 seconds apiece. It's like a typical Tana getting a CD. Mashallah, I love him. But and the thing about it, in spite of the book being authored, in the past, and that being not a hurdle, but just an aspect of reading anything. If you read the U.S. Constitution, if you read anything that was written more than 100 years ago, either you will be challenged in your ability to understand the material, or you will be challenged in your ability to really kind of, imbibe or take in the material. And that's just a part of it. But beyond that, most people just fall in love with Salam alaikum. It's good to see you again, man. You guys look so good, man. Most people I see them on television. They're like, or on the internet, like, oh man, COVID-19 was terrible for my health, and I ended up gaining weight, and I was, and I kind of let my appearance, go to the wayside because I'm not going into the office every day. But you guys all look great, mashallah. Alhamdulillah. But most people, I find that by the end of the book, they have really made a connection, with the Prophet ﷺ, and especially for people that, have kind of a deferential or just devotional relationship with the Prophet ﷺ, kind of like he's the Prophet, and I guess it's my duty to accept that as a Muslim, but I really don't know much about, who he is, what he was. If someone said, tell me 3 or 4 admirable things about him, I probably would struggle. But I am a Muslim, and I find that people like that, they really connect, and you really see them getting it. Like, oh man, okay, I get it. I actually understand why, we say the Prophet is our example, and the highest, moral example for human beings, and in that sense, I think it's the fact that we can't disconnect him from his context. The fact that, when looking at this, and this is one of the major differences with Jesus, alayhi salam. If one looks at Christ, alayhi salam, peace be upon him, he's called a ruh, a spirit that God immaculately cast into the womb of Mary. And when you begin to analyze at least popular accounts of the life of Christ, Riza Aslan, his book Zealot, and I'm sure there's probably some other alternative historical perspectives about Jesus. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome back. Come on. Alhamdulillah. You're telling me it's great to be back. I'm sure there are some alternative perspectives about the life of Christ, but most mainstream depictions of the life of Jesus Christ, you really find a very high example of just pure spirituality. Someone that had no concern with dunya. Someone that had no concern with dunya. Someone that was not concerned with good governance. Someone that was not concerned with commerce. Someone that wasn't married and thus did not have children. It's very easy, I think, for Christ, alayhi salam, to kind of hover above any particular historical context. He's just a spiritual exemplar, right? And really has very little to do with the material world. I mean, he enters the material world as a teacher and a role model, but he's not engaged with the material world. It's like, I'm there, but I'm really not there, which on the one hand can be inspiring because it reminds us that the spiritual is more significant than the material. On the other hand, and I say this with due respect and deference to Christians, it can probably confound you a little bit. Like, how am I supposed to follow the example of someone that, like, I really do run a business. I really am involved in local politics. I really am a husband. I do have children. I live in a country that does wage war against other countries. All of this is going, I really do things that I think some might find petty, but I think are significant in their own respect. I really do want to be esteemed by my colleagues at work. I really do want my neighbors to think well of me. Like, I'm a part of them. I'm not just like this kind of, I'm not in this like spiritual strata above the daily, mundane, quotidian rigmarole. I'm in that. I really live in that world, following the example of someone that has very little to do with that world might not be very instructive. It might be like aspirational, but like, okay, being a husband, what do I do? Right? You can give me broad-based principles. Be loving, love is kind, but like, how does it look? Like, when one wants to look and say, okay, for instance, did the Prophet Muhammad ever have marital problems? I find it quite empowering that the answer is yes. Was there ever a period of disharmony or discord between he and his spouses? Yes, that really happened. How did he deal with that? Did he throw things and tear up the house? Did he yell and scream about how he's going to be respected in his house? No, that never happened. but he did get to a place where he withdrew and decided to stay by himself for 30 days and just say, look, this is just all, which I think says something about, even that, I find that a very profound, if you look at like even that, right, the Prophet ﷺ was having some domestic trouble. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He certainly never engaged in abusive behavior, verbally or physically. That's to be expected. But he didn't even try to bring about like a decisive end to the conflict. I find that when my wife and I are at odds, my biggest mistake is probably my impatience. I'm not willing to deal with the discomfort of that. I want to let's talk about this right. Let's deal with this now. Let's deal with this now. And in that, I can become quite pushy and quite forceful. And my wife is now disinclined to even converse about whatever was the issue. Right? It's like just because my attitude is like very like almost this. And I think men are taught that this is a virtue. Like I'm going to grab the bull by the horns. Where there's some issue. Okay, let's talk about this now. Let's sit down and the fact that the Prophet ﷺ didn't do that, I think that challenges even certain notions that we have about masculinity and what men do. He didn't say, let's talk about this now. He said, you know what? I'm gonna step back. I'm gonna step back. Now I'm gonna take some time to reflect on what's happening here. I trust that you will also take some time to reflect on what's happening here. Right? And let's come back after things have cooled down a bit. And he was in that state for 30 whole days, an entire month, right? Just living by himself and living alone and just reflecting. And then the verse was revealed where Allah commands him to say, look, if you don't like the situation as it exists now, just let me know and I will pave the way forward. I will make your transition easy. Right? There's not going to be a bitter divorce. There's not going to be a curse of any kind. There's not going to be. If this really doesn't work for you, just let me know, and I will make this as easy as it can possibly be. Right? We don't need arbitration. Just let me know. But if you want Allah and His Messenger, then know that God will reward you. God will bless you. This is, and it began with Aisha radiallahu anha. She said, I want God and His Messenger. I want this, right? But I just think like stuff like that, if you are a Christian relying on the lived example of Jesus, you'll never have a story like that because he wasn't married. That's not something you can rely on. So I think in a sense, it is the fact that the Prophet ﷺ is in the muck, in the mire, the daily stuff, the regular kind of lived realities that we all confront on a daily basis. It is only through that you can actually see his greatness, that you can actually see the practicality of his example, right? I mean, if you gave me two people and you said, who do you want to follow spiritually? One person lives in a cave and he makes dhikr all the time. Now, no doubt there's going to be, a positive effect of that kind of solitude, that kind of remembrance. I don't think it's un-Islamic to say. I've been inspired by monks and people like that, like just seeing them. You see a kind of qadasa, like a kind of holiness, kind of like, man, you have divorced the world in its entirety. When I see monks of the Buddhist tradition or monks of the Christian tradition, it's like, man, you've divorced the world. You have nothing to do with the world. And I think in that, yes, I can derive some inspiration. Or do you want to follow this person who's a politician and a business person and a father and a husband and has had to be a military general, but has done so with great morality, great integrity? Me, give me the latter. I know I can benefit from the latter more. Yes, I might be inspired by the former. Wow, it's like an angel in human form. I think that might be the feeling. Like he's like, is he human? You know, he's just, his life has been consumed with dhikr. Is he a human being, or is he, wow? I mean, just to see a person like that, touch a person like that, I can imagine that producing some inspirational excitement. But the second person, it's like, show me. How do you maintain your integrity? How do you balance between serving other people and not forgetting yourself? How do you practice your faith with such integrity while dealing with the world and all of its muck and sticky stuff and dirt and filth and all the rest of it? And I think that only when you see the Prophet ﷺ in that light, in that respect, that, the things about his life that make us uncomfortable, maybe his engagement with military conflict, maybe his engagement with some of the social conventions of the time, like human enslavement and things like that, only in that can you see this is how a God-pleasing life looks in real life, in real time, right? And this is what I think elevates the Prophet ﷺ, right? And I think you see that in the Shama'il. I mean, you see it in the Seerah, right? The Seerah is, and we've done Seerah with this group, it's more of kind of a narrative and a story. Shama'il are different. The Shama'il, the work of the Shama'il Muhammadiyah, different chapters that are separated by category. So his smile, his laughter, his clothes, his lifestyle, etc. And I think it'll be interesting to, with some historical analysis, making some personal connections for us. I think it might be instructive, to kind of go through that book a little bit at a time, the way that we've done everything in this class. This class is as slow as molasses, but I think we maintain the space because we enjoy it. We enjoy it, and I think that it can also be something that we can look forward to. It's relaxing. It's just a couple of hadiths about the Prophet ﷺ. We may do 4, may do 5, maybe 10, maybe 15. We'll see. Sometimes there's a lot of repeated hadiths, throughout the book. But, each chapter will get closer and closer, to the Prophet ﷺ. We'll learn something. We'll learn something about the narrators of the hadith, right? This was narrated by this person. We can, offer some biographical sketches about this person, and it might be, it might be really cool. It might be really cool. Any ideas, questions about this or anything else? Mashallah, it's been a long time since we've seen each other, so it's good to be with you guys in person. Alhamdulillah. You guys waited a year and a half, and this is the low frequency that we're, tuned in at. Yes.
So I was telling someone not correct, and he's Muslim, and I think from his thing, he either read something or from his something that he learned or something that was taught to him was something that was taught to him was that the hadith is not as maybe important or not as reliable or something that should not be learned as much as the Quran or the Sunnah. And so what do you say to that?
The hadiths are, there's a saying among scholars that hadith are a problem for everybody except scholars. When you look at a hadith, it's important to know what you're looking at. A hadith is a historical report. And it's usually, and this is not like Ubayd trying to weaken our, or trying to decrease our confidence in hadith, they are usually paraphrased. Right? There are very few hadith, in fact, so I think I said, that are like the hadith is the way the Prophet spoke, with no variability across narrators. Usually the same hadith is usually narrated in a few different ways. So you can tell that the person is paraphrasing, like the person is kind of putting it into their words, kind of what they heard. And, you know, I heard him say this, or I saw him do that. The level of veracity is not to the level of the Quran, except, okay, so hadith have many different classifications, but two of the most important are, one is called mutawatir and one is called ahad. Mutawatir is a fancy Arabic term, actually, that means diffusely congruent. Okay? What that means, and for all practical intents and purposes, if you have an event or a report that four separate chains of people report, and it's the same event, right? And it's impossible that these people would be able to come together to collude to make something up. So, you know, think about, like, in our practical context, mutawatir statements are statements like John F. Kennedy famously said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." Now, so many different people have said that. So many different people have quoted Kennedy as saying that it would be impossible for all of them to be lying. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's mutawatir. When a hadith is mutawatir, is that so many people said, for instance, a mutawatir hadith is, oddly enough, فَمَنْ يَكْذِبَ عَلَيَّ عَمْدًا فَلْيَتَبَوَّأْ مَقْعَدَهُ فِي النَّارِ. Whoever lies in my name intentionally, then he or she shall prepare their own seat in hell. That's mutawatir. That's actually a hadith that is diffusely congruent, right? Anything under that level of veracity is called singular hadith, meaning it's just one chain of people, right? One single chain of people that all have good memories and all have good, upstanding character. That said, from the first one to the second to the third to the fourth, the first one I heard the Prophet say this or that, right? And the hadith is transmitted. Now, the vast majority of hadith are singular, right? I would say 2/3, maybe even more like 4/5 of hadith are singular, right? But the mutawatir are much fewer, right? Now, the thing about the Quran is that every verse of the Quran is mutawatir. See, every verse of the Quran, every single verse of the Quran has been transmitted through separate chains that are too numerous to allow for collusion. And this is why the Quran is the Quran. Now, in those singular hadith, when we say that a hadith is authentic, we're not actually saying that this hadith on its own is determinative of like what we should do about something, right? There's a whole constellation of values, other hadith, verses of the Quran, normative Islamic principles, that hadith has to be put in conversation with those. And we say, okay, what does this mean, right? And that's why before the current, age, it was always the scholars of fiqh. People of fiqh kind of determined like normative Islamic practice, right? But now, one of the great dangers of our community is that people can read one single hadith, and from that, they will just act, right? You'll ask a person, why are you doing this? I read a hadith. That's very, very dangerous. When we say that, and most people that are anti-hadith, I feel like they're reacting to things they've seen, things they've heard that don't strike them as correct. And when the person is asked, why are you doing this? The person says, what? It's a hadith. It's a hadith. And they're just like, no, one of my teachers, he called it Islamic AIDS, which is I don't want to talk about hadith as viruses, but if you don't have any understanding of like norms, if there's no understanding of like values, like as Muslims we have a Quran, we have prophetic practice, we have a seerah, we have broad-based values and moral commitments. We have lots of different things. All of those weighed together give us God's will. What does Allah want from me in this moment, right? If you don't have any of those defenses, a person has a single hadith and it just shuts down the discussion. It's like we're discussing what we should do as a family or community or married couple, and one person says, Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the Prophet said, it's like the discussion is over. That's a condition my teacher called Islamic AIDS, where it's like, okay, if the hadith is authentic, that means on the basis of formal standards of authenticity, we can now admit this hadith into a discussion, meaning it's now admissible as evidence. When we say the hadith is authentic, this is admissible as evidence of what God wants from us. But it still has to be put into conversation with other things. Even verses of the Quran. This understanding of Islam doesn't always jive well with moderns because it is quite elitist. It does say that, there's a level of scholarship that one has to attain so that you can look at the entire corpus of the text. And while looking at that entire corpus, you have access now to the will of God. Whereas we are a community of autodidacts, people that read for themselves. And we don't have 8, 10, 12, 14 years to give to anything besides medicine and engineering. And we think that religious scholarship, who needs that? You don't need 14 years to understand religion. Just pick up a book. Right? It's like Goodwill Hunting. You could have got it with a library card. That's what Matt Damon said. But in actuality, religious scholars, you can't just get it with a library card. There's a normative practice. So if somebody reads a verse of the Quran and concludes that domestic violence is okay, this is not reflective of any normative Islamic practice. You won't find, even in old books authored 400 years ago, the idea of wife striking, corporal punishment. It's like this is a normal thing. Yeah. No, all of this is understood within a culture of these verses are there, these hadith are there, but we have principles about kindness, about mercy, about conviviality, the ability to live together, about domestic harmony, about peace being preferred over war in the context of Muslims relating to people who live with them. There's a whole universe of values, right? That before we say something is halal, haram, recommended, you want to be confident that the scholar speaking is weighing all of that, is weighing all of these commitments, all of these values, and then at the end, we make a determination. And this is why traditionally that process was referred to as ijtihad. Even if you have a very basic knowledge of the Arabic language, you hear in that the same root as jihad. Ijtihad, that means hard work. Modern Muslims will make you think this is easy. You open the book and say, yeah, it's right there. The Prophet said, look, it's right there. It's right there. Well, that. And I'm always thinking, just a practical person. Right? Ibn al-Mundir, Ibn al-Mundir, classical scholar. He wrote a book about what Islamic scholars agree on. And the book was like 300 pages. It's a good sized book. Tabari wrote a book about what Islamic scholars disagree on. and it was like 20 values. It was like 20 values. Whatever you don't have to be, a bookish person, but just the size and the scope of the disagreements alone suggest to you that nobody's just looking at this right there. This is a hadith. You think 1,400 years of scholarship is just all people say, there it is. The Prophet said it was in the discussion. And I think that, there's many positive developments that have come from the Salafi movement from Saudi Arabia. One of the negative developments, I think, that have come from that movement is that it gives people the sense that this is how Islamic law is done. There it is. It's a hadith. I'm thinking, you think people are sitting, studying 20, 30 years, trying to reach the legal acumen of like justices, Supreme Court justices, so that you can read the Constitution and say, why would anybody go to law school? Why would anybody debate the meanings of the Constitution if you say, look, I can read. I can look the Constitution up right now. I can give you an opinion that's as good as, Justice Sotomayor. All of that time on the bench, all of that legal scholarship, she wasted her time. All you have to do is read the Constitution. It's right there. It's right there, man. I think that was kind of a, that was like an oversimplification that led to then this rejection of hadith altogether. Where it's like, no, if you're reading hadith for the purpose of like moral edification, like I'm trying to like build myself morally, then read them because they're great for that. But if, on the other hand, you're reading hadith for the purpose of like, I want to say what's halal, what's haram, what Allah wants, and what, it's like, hold them up, cowboy. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's just read hadith to build ourselves, spiritually and to fortify our character. So when I see people who reject hadith, I'm always thinking, there's no reason for that. Like, why? Why would you do that? There's no reason for that. Only if you think, these singular statements of the Prophet ﷺ, usually mentioned without context, people are just running off with them and just making decisions that are catastrophic to the community, to their families, to themselves. And then I think you would say, let's just do away with these hadith, man. They're too problematic, and let's just do. But if you understand them properly, look, a sound hadith means that it's admissible in a conversation about what God wants. Meaning this actually meets the criteria of admissibility, meaning like we can enter it into the discussion. If it's not sound, if it's not authentic, it's like, okay, it can't even be entered into the discussion. Does it? It's not authentic. It's like we can't even attribute that statement to the Prophet Muhammad. But if it sounds okay, we'll admit it in the discussion and let's see what we come up with. It really shocks me when I see people that have like lost their iman over hadith. I meet people like this. Well, like I used to be Muslim and then I read this one hadith. I was like, subhanallah, what? It's like I read this one hadith that made me very uncomfortable. Subhanallah. And I think that maybe this is something that comes with literacy, the fact that people can kind of read for themselves and make their own decisions. It could also, I think, be the Muslims kind of mimicking a Christian fundamentalism, right, without knowing that's what they're doing, right, where every single Christian has to personally look into every single verse of the Bible, and every single verse of the Bible is from God, and this, you have to have faith in it at that level, and I think that you have some Muslims that look at hadith in that way. Everything, if they say this is an authentic or sahih hadith, then it becomes the determinant of whether or not you have faith in how you believe in it, what you believe about it. If you don't put this into your life right now, you're not Muslim. It's like, what about reading the hadith and say, okay, I see that this is accepted as authentic. I don't exactly know what's meant by it. There's some of its content kind of makes me a little bit uncomfortable. But what does this mean for me? Like, what does this mean? What does this mean? Then I think you're in a much more stable position that you don't have to reject. You don't have to reject it and say, nah, if the Prophet said this and I'm not Muslim. It's like, wait, hold on. Let's look at this, man. You know what I mean? It's clearly making you uncomfortable. And some of it, too, is a willingness to explore yourself. Why is this making you uncomfortable? Because most of the time, we see similar statements in other places. They don't make us uncomfortable. You know, sometimes and this is just one example, any mention of valor in battle makes us uncomfortable. Any mention of battle, right, makes us uncomfortable. But we all celebrate Memorial Day. That's strange. I mean, it's always like any mention of valor in battle that the Prophet ﷺ had to display valor in battle. It's like, oh my God, you mean he actually had to fight? Maybe like sometimes that happens. And the same person, I kid you not, this is a true story. Like they were uncomfortable with the idea that the Prophet ﷺ had to engage, militarily. And I said, well, what's your favorite movie? He said 300. So I guess it's Russell Crowe. If he's the historic figure that has to engage in that way, then I guess you can attach some moral value to it. But if it's a religious figure, it becomes like, now why is that? I think this is because of the Christian context in which we live, because Jesus never did that. Sometimes we don't realize how much we've absorbed of our environment. So when we think about religious figure, martial combat, wrong. Now, if you took, say, people from Japan, given their tradition of the samurai, that would not make them uncomfortable. In fact, they probably would feel that virtue is best displayed in that. If a man can keep his integrity and his virtue, or a woman can keep her integrity and virtue in such a situation, this is truly a principled person. This is truly a moral exemplar. But for us, it's like religious figure fighting. Oh, because Jesus did. Because Jesus is not recorded to have had that as a part of his life. So for us, it's like, oh man, we feel like an inferiority to Christians because our religious role model had to fight. Yours didn't. Right? Or our religious role model did have romantic relationships. Yours didn't. Does that make him, oh man? It's like some of us are uncomfortable. The Prophet ﷺ engaged in sexual relationships. Does that make you uncomfortable? It's like, you mean he wasn't praying all the time? You mean there was actually a part of his life that was related to, romance? Yes, there was a part of his life that was related to romance. And for some of us, it's like, why does that make you uncomfortable? Is there a part of your life related to, I love my wife? Is there a part of your life related to romance? Yes. Why does that make you so uncomfortable? So sometimes it's like looking at what about this is making you uncomfortable. Right? You see this, why are you so uncomfortable with this? And usually, as I was mentioning, it's because you've misunderstood the context of the Prophet ﷺ, and more often, you've misunderstood your own context. Right? Since we've done the Zoom, I'm so accustomed to looking at Ron. Ron's like, man, she's talking to me. And also, I like your mask. It has a very nice print on it. But I was Ron's thinking, man, why is he talking to me? Man, what did I do? It's like, okay, maybe these same things exist in your own context in a way that you haven't, analyzed. And maybe that's why the example of the Prophet is there. One of the biggest examples of that to me is like human enslavement. That's something that makes very many people uncomfortable. Oh man, he lived in a society in which human enslavement was practiced. And we may not realize it, but we live in a society in which human enslavement is practiced. Both in its pre-modern form, like human trafficking, still goes on. You know, we may not realize, subhanAllah, maybe our pizza is being delivered by somebody that's being kept in this country as a slave, man. Or maybe your landscaping is being done by someone who's being enslaved. This is really happening. You just get the pizza and give the tip and just go in the house and eat it. Maybe you're passing by Cook County Jail and you don't realize that everybody there, so 26 in California, everyone there is a pretrial detainee. They have not actually been charged with any crime. And they still enjoy the presumption of innocence. They haven't been charged. They've been charged, but they haven't been found guilty, haven't been convicted, of any crime. And they are supposed to enjoy a presumption of innocence. But they're incarcerated because they can't post bail, because they don't have money to post bail. So by our own law, these are innocent people, just charged with crimes, not convicted of any crimes, charged with crimes, who are in jail, held, denied their freedom because of their financial standing. That's right now. That's our society. Okay? But somehow, if a person, if we think about any of these, like Deepak Chopra, for instance, right? Nobody would say that Deepak Chopra was completely invalid as a moral guide in our time because he didn't abolish, prisons. It was a part of the world. It's a part of the world. Now, maybe he said something about the injustice of prisons and privately owned prisons. Maybe he said nothing. Whatever. I don't think it would be fair to say if he lived in a world in which you had people that enjoyed the presumption of innocence, that were incarcerated, there's no way he can be a moral guide. I'm sorry, the world doesn't work like that. It's something we all acknowledge. We have a huge facility in our own city. Some of us have worked with Believers Bailout and organizations like that actively take on the abolitionist cause, about prisons. Some of us haven't, right? When you look at the Prophet ﷺ, what did he do about enslavement? He created, a culture of emancipation, right? If this happens, free a slave, free your brothers. Don't enslave your brothers. He created a culture of emancipation, and for people who maintain the institution, he created a culture of kind treatment. And sometimes wisdom is recognizing that sometimes this is the best you can do with injustice in the world. Sometimes it's just that's as far as you can go. I like to think about it like poverty. I would love for humanity to get to a place where we can eradicate poverty. But we may just get to a place where charity is still something encouraged. That might be the best that we can do. If we can eradicate poverty, Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia said that by 2040 we should be able to eradicate poverty, extreme poverty in the world. Muslims should be, contributing to efforts to eradicate extreme poverty, because a lot of Muslims are extremely poor, globally. But if we did it, and poverty was something that existed, and we just did what we could to kind of, alleviate the harshest aspect of the burdensome nature. I used to work as a translator. That's very bad English. That's very bad English. Just as soon as I said the sentence, I just said, "Oh my God, that's one of those you type in, harshest aspects of the burdensome nature." No, hell no. That's bad English. Bad English. But if we just work to alleviate the harshest aspects of poverty without being able to eradicate it, would that really make us as a generation immoral? Well, maybe that's the best that we could do. And I think when I look at the example of the Prophet, sometimes it's the best that we could do. We cannot eliminate poverty. And many of us, in spite of the fact that we did it, we still went on to, take vacations and buy nice cars and buy computers and we felt good that, look, I did my part. I gave my zakah, I gave my sadaqah. I did my part. I did what I could do. I couldn't move the mountain, but I took a couple stones to the other side. And I think the example of the Prophet teaches you, that's what being a good human being is. Just taking a couple rocks to the other side. I couldn't move the whole mountain, man. But I took a couple rocks to the other side. So that's the best you can do. Right? But if something happens societally and we are able to move the mountain, Muslims should support that. Which is one of the reasons why when slavery was abolished globally, there was only like 2 Muslim countries that held out. Like, no. Most Muslim countries and most Muslim scholars signed on immediately. Yes. This is something that should be removed from the human experience. This should not be it. And they didn't say, but it's in the Quran. Poverty is in the Quran. But if somebody wanted to, eradicate poverty, would a Muslim say, no, you can't. It's in the Quran. There must be poor people. It's in the Quran. No. Yes, it's a reality. But we're always working to improve that reality. Right? And that's what prophetic teaching offers us. How to be in that reality, working and taking the incremental steps to improve that reality. And that's what it's about sometimes, man. Right? That's what it's about sometimes. So some of those things is like, why is this making you so uncomfortable? It was just life back then, just like life is life now. Right? Do you think that your life is some kind of unadulterated moral blessing? No, man. I mean, our society has its good, has its bad. You know what I'm saying? We're, as Muslims, we try to live as conscientiously as we can. That's the example of the Prophet. Try to live as conscientiously as you can, contribute to the good. Life will never be a utopia. Contrary to what some millennials believe, life is never going to become an equity paradise. That's not life. Life is never going to be an equity paradise where everything is fair. Even in the socialist governments that I think many of them want to see America become, there's still wealth inequality and disparity. I just think there's a better safety net, and people that are impoverished live much more comfortably with access to health care and access to higher education and things that are free in a true socialist government. But it's not like everybody drives a Benz. That's probably not going to happen. That's not going to happen anywhere in the dunya, because that's not the nature of the dunya. Do you understand what I'm saying? And if you look at the kind of the system of the Prophet ﷺ, it was just about that, creating a basis for social welfare. That's what zakah is supposed to do. It's not going to eliminate disparity. It's not going to eliminate inequality. No, it's just wishful thinking. But it creates more of a basis that, even if you are poor, you should be able to count on annually some kind of, money that has been allotted to you by the community to help you achieve some upward mobility. That money that, the community is setting aside to raise you. That's zakat. But the idea that we're all ever going to be like completely and totally equal in our access to power, privilege, wealth, that's only in a college auditorium. Only in a college auditorium. That's not real. Right? The Prophet ﷺ is showing us how to live morality in real life, where you have rich people and poor people. You have kings and you have slaves. Yeah, this is real life. This is real life, man. Other questions? That was all from your question about hadith. Good to see you, man. You been keeping up with the NBA playoffs? MashaAllah. I actually know you to be a Raptors fan. They're not in it this year. They'll be back, inshallah. They'll be back. They'll be back, inshallah.
People have a conflict style, they will this is right, this is wrong, I got that, it turns out to be. I think like on other areas of say I work somewhere, you think they know about this, and then they come off with a similar pattern, and I feel that people are successful, whether that's working a project or it's learning to do there, there's that more listening approach or maybe understanding, but that speaks volume of your female also.
Oh, of course, man. I couldn't agree more. This idea of lita arafu, that we've created you into, يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا. O humanity, we created you from a male and a female, and we spread you into nations and tribes to know one another. A lot of people say that we tend to forget that the first knowing is between the male and the female, right? All of the differences described in this verse, the first is the man, woman, then nations, then tribes, right? So a lot of people say male and female, that's basic. We understand that. Men have to get to know women, and women have to get to know that men are crazy. Men have to get to know that women are crazy. One of my teachers would always tell me, women are crazy. And to women, men are crazy. Once you guys understand that, you'll just forgive each other. Once you understand that, it's like, understand that there are things that you're saying to your wife and she's thinking, man, it's crazy. He's out of his mind. Just like there are things that she's saying to you and you're thinking, the woman is crazy. She's out of her mind. And then the struggle is that ta'aruf, getting to know one another. Why does he feel so strongly about that? And why does, she feel so strongly about that? And then we recognize, I might still think she's crazy. She might still think I'm crazy. But there's a wisdom in the fact that we're different priorities, different love languages, different things. There's a wisdom in the fact that we're different. And maybe this is what creates the basis for attraction, right? Then nations, shu'ub, are the differences that are based on kind of national character and identity. That, like certain people, you find that people are very, very subtle, and especially in kind of the emotionality of their relationships, they're very, very subtle. Two people can, be very, very passionate about each other's company, share very few words. Don't break the flinky. Don't break, it's like and then other people, they're just effusive, just overflowing, and it's like Habibi. It's like, man, that must be your best friend. No, I saw him once at a gas station last year. It's like, that's a cultural difference. You know what I'm saying? It's like, man, I thought that was your dad or something like that, man. Habibi, mashallah, wallah, I see the shofak, wallahi, he's like, man, Uncle. No. We had a class together a couple years ago. SubhanAllah. And then certain people, they can be with their grandfather. And it's just they just would never pour over their granddad like that. He wouldn't like it and they wouldn't like to do it. Culturally, it's just different, right? Those kinds of differences. The kind of differences like I can speak to, as an African American, when you come into the home, you have to greet everybody in the home. And that's regarded, if you don't, that's regarded as rude. I had a friend from Saudi, came in, didn't speak to my grandmother out of kindness. Like he thought, the women of the house, you don't, you actually leave them unbothered as a show of kind of respecting their space. And my grandmother, Will, he don't see me sitting here? I said, well, in his culture, this is my house. And he would go ahead. Hi, ma'am, I'm sorry, I thought that maybe those kinds of differences, those kind of cultural differences, And then after that, the tribal differences are kind of an extension of the cultural differences. But I think in our context, I think the tribal differences become differences in opinions, like liberals, conservatives. They don't look at things the same way, right? People that are traditionalists and people that are progressives. These are like the modern, these are like digital like they're progressive, they're more traditional. If the two sides were interested in learning from each other, Jonathan Haidt has written some good books, like Righteous Mind, and like it's not simply that one group is immoral and one group is moral, but rather the two groups emphasize different aspects of morality. That for a lot of progressives and liberals, repudiating harm is the highest moral value. So if they know that someone is being hurt in some way by a statement or dead naming them or anything that appears to induce harm is something they'll pay attention to immediately. Like, no, you can't harm people. Whereas conservatives, respect for authority, right, is a much greater, right, and both of those have their place. You see, because respect for authority, yes, you can hear that as like, cultural conformity or respect for law and order or something like that. You can also just basic rights. Like one of the reasons why, in spite of maybe wealth disparity, I won't just go up and just take something from someone else. It's because I respect their authority over their belongings. It's not mine. Why, even though there might be wealth disparity in the society, I wouldn't loot somebody's establishment, trash it, because what? I respect that's his. It doesn't belong. And the funny thing about someone who doesn't place value in respect for authority is that they always want people to respect the authority of what's theirs. So it's like, even if you stole something from someone, if someone turned around and stole it from you, you would still say, he stole it from me. You would say, well, it's a dog-eat-dog world. I don't respect anybody's property rights, so why would anybody respect mine? No. That's what they call it. That's natural to the human experience, right? A respect for personal property. I think this is a place that Engels and Marx they missed the mark. I think they're wrong. Someone might disagree with me, but I think that respect for personal property is something intrinsic to the human being. This is my phone. It's mine. If you say no, babe, it's the community's phone. No, it's mine, right? I think even in traditional societies where there was more communalism, sometimes I feel like the communalism that people speak is exaggerated. Like Indians didn't believe in personal property, right? The First Nations, they didn't believe in personal. No, I don't think that they had a culture of torts and property law like English common law that the white settlers brought with them, but they had a basic understanding of this is the sanctuary for my animal, this belongs to me, this is right, and there was just more communalism and more was shared. But the idea that no, they didn't believe in any personal property. No, I think that's a historical misread. I think they had more communalism. But so my point is that one group might emphasize respect for authority. Another group might emphasize repudiating harm, trying to understand each other. Why is respect for authority so important? Well, because without respect for authority, the only thing left is anarchy. And with anarchy, there's no civilization. So when they see, boundaries being smudged, this is something that causes great concern for conservative people. Oh my! And sometimes they're just so paranoid. It's like, if we are doing this today, tomorrow somebody will take my house. And if you watch Fox News, you can feel like that. If they can tell you to call a he a she, they can tell you that your home is not yours. People are like, yeah, it makes sense. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And in the mind of a person that is, protective of authority, in that case, they feel it's the authority of nature. No, this is this, and this is this. You know, if that line can be smudged, what other lines can be smudged? Right? That's a different moral value than someone that says, no, repudiate harm. But the two sides getting to know one another, right? Getting to know one another it's tough. And it doesn't mean that we don't have personal constitutions, that we won't come down in one place or another place. And those things tend to change as you get older. You know, when you're young, it's all about don't harm anybody. As you get older, I think, you know, life teaches you more. You're like, well, yes, you know, don't harm anybody, but there's no situation in which everybody is going to have exactly what they want. It's just that's not going to, you know, I mean, that's not going to happen. You know, that's not going to happen, right? So I don't know, but I think you're right, though. I think you're right that being open to listening and having some self-awareness, you know, like, doesn't mean that I don't have positions, but I try to be self-aware. You know, why is this more important to me than this? Right? Why is this more important to me? And I try to be like aware, and that helps me actually to soften some of my stances, but still hold them, but to soften them. So, like, again, like, for instance, like respect for authority. If somebody wants to argue with me that homosexuality is permissible in Islam, I'm gonna say, no, I don't agree with that. But making sure everybody struggling with anything feels like they have a place in the community and that we're inclusive and that we don't make people's aspects of their personal lives the focal point of their involvement in community, yes, I feel very strongly about that. But why I'm unwilling to go and say, no, it's all good, is respect for authority. No, God didn't say that. So I don't believe God didn't say that.
And that's what I feel. They have a knowledge. It's a win-win situation for them. They can be confident, they have the background knowledge of themselves, their point, but instead of addressing it that way, you could have, I don't know, it's more,
well, that's the thing, man. I think we're all very passionate. You know, we're all very passionate. And it's very, I mean, even if you understand this broad cornucopia of moral concerns, that doesn't mean that you don't feel more strongly about some things than others. You know, Jonathan Haidt in this book, Righteous Mind, which I thought was a really, really good book, I think he breaks down like human ethical and moral concerns in like 6 categories. One is repudiating harm, the other is respect for authority, the other is in-group solidarity, right? That tends to be one. Another is sanctity purity, right? Now, for religious folks, you hear sanctity purity, it's like you think about virginity. But even people that are like really into food, you can see that, like people that I only eat organic, I only eat, you know, farm raised, or I'm a vegan, or I don't, you know, fair trade, you know, chocolate, fair trade, coffee. That this isn't just about my health. There's a moral value to consuming pure food, right? There's a sanctity that I preserve within my body when I don't put processed food, you know, into my body, right? So that's a part of sanctity, purity. There's 2 other ones. I mean, I read the book quite some time ago, but you know, usually people that have moral concerns, their moral concerns are some valid kind of moral concern. Usually, all people, progressives, liberals. It's just that there's something in their experience that they're prioritizing that one above all of the other ones. You see what I'm saying? They're like, this is the one for them that is more important than all of the other ones. And for religious folks, it used to be respect for authority, God's authority. Like that was the one above all of the other ones. This is the one that's the most important to me. But I don't know. I mean, you know, I don't know. You know, times are changing.
So how do you navigate when you're having conversations? Like, how do you navigate, like, expressing something that you feel strongly about and, like, making your position known while at the same time being good, understanding?
And this is why, personally, I mean, the framers of the U.S. Constitution, they intentionally built into the Constitution strong executorship or strong executive, like a strong executive office, because at the end of the day, only authority can really decide between two mutually valid positions. That's just that's just the way that it is, right? And this is one of the reasons why the Prophet ﷺ said, if three Muslims are together, I'm coming to your point, right? But one of them should be an emir, right? One of them should have a decisive word. Why? So as to preserve the unity of the group. So if we're all trying to get to Naperville together, our goal is to get there together, right? And someone says, take 290. Someone says, no, someone says, take 88. Someone says, no, take 355. Someone has to be able to say, no, we're going to take 355. We're going to take 355. Right? I think 355 has less traffic. We're going to take 355. So if you are the decision maker, meaning like, first, you want to listen to the opposing perspective, and you want to actually think about it. Like, don't just, perfunctorily just kind of sit there like, tell me, all wives know that when the husband says, well, let's hear your perspective. But he's kind of looking at his phone. That is interesting. But I think we're going to go with my idea. Let me hear what you think. No, that's, you make some very valid points. But I think, actually listen. Like, and I think to here, just being practical, if you're in a position to make a decision, I think you have to do this. You just have to do this. Displaying a willingness to take the other person's position early on wins their trust, right? Displaying a willingness to say, let's do it your way, right? If I could give one advice to my son in becoming a husband, I would say, always take counsel with your wife, and then do it her way sometimes. Just early, even if you think this is not going to work out. Look, these free-floating shells cannot be placed on this wall unless we find the studs. But she wants them right here. Just put them up there. Let the drywall come down. I mean, it'll cost some money to get it repaired. Yeah, sure. But the trust that you gain that, okay, let's do it your way. It's priceless. It's worth more than having somebody repair your drywall. So yeah, it'll come down. So the next time when you say, I've listened, I think you make a good point, but I really think it's better for us to do it this way, this time. The person trusts that you've actually considered their idea because you've considered their ideas in the past and you even adopted them. So yeah, I'll go with that, right? The other thing too is, even if you decide against what the person is suggesting and you have the authority to do so, offering some kind of consolation that, okay, we're going to do it this way, but we'll do it this. We'll come back and how does this feel, right? This is sunnah, right? Okay, this is what I think we're going to do. What do you think about this? How can that? Some way that you can feel that your perspective has been, included in our deliberation. Not that I'm just shutting you down completely, but no, I think I think this is the best thing. But what else can we? And we get into situations like that. I mean, I can think of a number of situations that we've been in like that, in community. And maybe lastly, if you're not in a position to make the decision, sometimes it's best to say, okay, I'll do this and you'll do that. If unity is not required, unity is not required in everything. Some things unity is not required. It's like, I feel like this and I feel like that. That's cool. فَاللَّهُ يَحْكُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ فِي مَا كَانُوا يَخْتَلِفُونَ. God will judge between them in that which they used to differ. But on things where unity is needed, like we work at the same, like this is a business, and I'm managing, or I'm directing, or this is a household and we want to be on one accord, or this is a family, or this is an organization, or things like that require unity. You have to do a little more selling. But things that don't require unity, it's like, I feel like this, I feel like that. Okay, okay. And really appreciating that difference, man. Like, we don't have to agree about everything. And disagreement is not disloyalty. Disagreement is not even necessarily disharmony. I think our disagreements can be like different parts of a band that, each sound comes together to make the actual music. It's like we don't agree about everything, right? But try to put some moral value on the argument of the other side. Some things should be demonized, but not usually. Usually don't demonize. So even like the people that might disagree with me about, say, Islam and homosexuality, Islam and same-sex, sexual intercourse. The fact that I recognize we may disagree ultimately in terms of what policy should be or what official stances should be, but I recognize that you're trying to be a mercy to people that are struggling. You're trying to make sure the community feels open to people who don't always feel open, always feel accepted in spaces. Well, the fact that you're trying to make sure that certain people that might believe that they're denied the mercy of God, that they feel the mercy of God. Do you think I don't see moral value in that? What kind of Muslim would I be if I you think I don't? Yeah, I think ultimately I'm putting my final weight somewhere else. But you think I don't see any moral value in what you're doing? You really think I think you're trying to ruin Islam? No. I think, one of the consequences of not holding moral positions with love and mercy is that those moral positions can get discarded if we can't hold them with love and mercy. But you really think I would demonize you? You really think I would think like the way some people talk about progressive Muslims, they want to ruin Islam and they just want to be Western and they're probably Muslims of conscience, just like we are. Really. And they have different moral concerns than we do. And their moral concerns are valid. And they've chosen to put their weight somewhere, and we've chosen to put our weight somewhere. Maybe learning from each other will be the best for the community. Right? So for them asking, okay, how do we hold our position but maintain the primacy of Scripture? How do we hold this position about love and mercy and acceptance? But how do we do that and maintain the primacy of God's Word? That might be their challenge. And my challenge might be, how do we maintain the primacy of God's Word, but with mercy, with love, with brotherhood and sisterhood? And that way we're challenging each other in righteousness. You know what I'm saying? And I really think that we can do that, man. I think that we can do that. It's like, we don't have to be, just because we disagree doesn't mean we have to be disagreeable, hate each other, and it's like, no, subhanAllah, man. There was an Egyptian scholar. Look, you guys, we just love each other in this classroom. You guys heard all my stories. I don't have a single new story to share with this group. I'm just being real with you. Although I am learning different things every day, but the percentage of what I learn on a daily basis compared to the percentage of what I've already used is probably like 1 to 99%. So every now and then something new comes out. Most of the stuff is just review. There was this Egyptian scholar, religious scholar, and he's always criticized politicians and the political establishment. And somebody said, man, you got so much to say about politics, why don't you try it? And he said, yeah, okay. He ran for public office, and he won. He won. And after a year in public office, they asked him, what have you learned? He said something that was really touching to me. So I learned that it's not just people with hijabs and beards that love God and His messenger. That's what I learned. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. You know, he learned something that humbled him. So I learned that it's not just people with hijabs and beards and stuff that love God and His messenger. A lot of people that I used to criticize, they also love God and His messenger. We just disagree procedurally about what we're supposed to do. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. We'll stop there, man. It's good to be back. Conversation flows so much more easily than on Zoom, I swear, wallahi. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wal-'asr. Inna al-insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilu s-salihati wa tawasaw bil-haqqi wa tawasaw bis-sabr. Ameen ya Rabbal 'alamin. Your phone is like it's the last leg.